There's no one. There's no one there to hold the hand to say, I love you, everything's going to be fine.
On June 29, 1967, Jayne Mansfield died in a horrific crash near Slidell, Louisiana. Police found her blonde wig, her broken watch, and 3 terrified children in the back seat. But they also found something else, something nobody talked about for years. A handwritten note crumpled between the seats. It wasn't addressed to her kids. It wasn't for her boyfriend, Sam Brody, who died beside her. The name on that paper shocked investigators, and what it said is even more shocking.
Fan letters that I'd received from fans that were all pertaining to my mom, whether they were...
Jayne Mansfield was born as Vera Jane Palmer on April 19, 1933, in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. Her parents, Herbert and Vera Palmer, were well-educated and successful. Her father was a respected attorney, and her mother was a school teacher. They lived comfortably and hosted elegant gatherings. Jayne grew up surrounded by this sense of high society, but deep down, something never felt quite right. Even as a little girl, she sensed that this perfect world would not last forever. That fear became real when Jayne was just 3 years old. In 1936, she was riding in the car with her parents when her father had a sudden heart attack behind the wheel. The car swerved off the road. Jayne and her mother survived without physical injury, but losing her father shattered her childhood. This moment shaped her forever. She felt the loss of his affection every day after that, and it created a deep need to be noticed and loved. Psychologists believe that early trauma like this can change a child forever, and Jayne was no exception. Throughout her life, she seemed to chase the attention she had lost. Yet Jayne was more than just a sad little girl. She was exceptionally bright. Her IQ was 163, which put her in the genius range. Even as a small child, she loved playing the piano and the violin. By the time she was 5, she was already performing classical pieces for family and neighbors. Jayne also loved to read, especially great authors like Shakespeare and Tolstoy. When she wasn't reading, she was acting in school plays. The people who knew her back then didn't see the dumb blonde image she would later take on. They saw a serious, talented girl with big dreams. When Jayne was 6, her mother remarried Harry Piers, a sales engineer. The family moved to Dallas, Texas, leaving behind the big house and the comfortable life they had known in Pennsylvania. The move was a shock. Dallas was very different, but Jayne adjusted in her own way. Even on their driveway, she would put on little concerts with her violin, gathering small crowds of neighbors to watch. Every moment like this showed her hunger to perform and be admired. Texas wasn't home, but it gave her a stage, and Jayne never missed a chance to take it. By the time Jayne was in elementary school, she was already telling people she would grow up to be a movie star. She practiced signing autographs, mimicked her favorite actresses, and loved to play dress-up. Teachers noticed how easily she commanded attention in school plays and talent shows. Even at age 12, she was taking dance lessons and acting classes. Everyone could see this was more than a childhood hobby. It was a deep, determined part of who she was. That determination led to a life-changing moment on Christmas Eve in 1949. Jayne was 16 years old at a high school party in Dallas when she met 20-year-old Paul Mansfield. Sparks flew right away. They started dating, and just a few weeks after Jayne turned 17 in January 1950, they secretly eloped. When Jayne became pregnant 3 months later, they decided to have a public ceremony in May of that year. The rushed romance surprised everyone. Yet, it was this quick, impulsive choice that set her on a path toward the life she had always dreamed of. When Jayne gave birth to her daughter, Jane Marie, on November 8, 1950, most people assumed her ambitions would fade. But becoming a mother didn't slow her down at all. Even with a baby, Jayne kept going to classes, rehearsals, and auditions. Paul hoped motherhood would keep her focused on home, but Jayne refused to give up her goals. Unlike most teenage mothers of the 1950s, she still entered beauty contests and tried out for acting roles. The tension between her drive and Paul's expectations started to grow. Jayne soon enrolled at Southern Methodist University and took acting classes. By day, she was a student and a mother. By night, she studied scripts, practiced lines, and chased every opportunity to perform. Jayne appeared in plays like Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman and impressed critics. Even Baruch Lumet, the famous acting teacher and father of director Sidney Lumet, noticed her talent and offered her free lessons. To pay for her dreams, Jayne modeled, sold books, and even gave dance lessons. Every spare hour went into becoming an actress, often behind Paul's back because he never really approved. When Paul was called up for Army service during the Korean War, Jayne stayed behind in Texas. It was hard, but it also gave her more freedom to focus on her career. Before he left, Paul promised that after his 2 years were up, they'd move to Hollywood. That was the light at the end of the tunnel for Jayne. Even though Paul hoped the promise would tame her ambition, it only fueled it more. In the spring of 1954, Jayne Mansfield decided to risk it all. She convinced her husband, Paul Mansfield, to leave Dallas and move to Los Angeles. She wanted to chase fame. Together with their daughter, Jane Marie, they squeezed into a tiny apartment in Van Nuys. It was crowded. They shared the small space with a Great Dane, 3 cats, 2 chihuahuas, a pink-dyed poodle, and a rabbit. Jayne did whatever she could to make money. She sold popcorn, taught dance, and modeled. She even took classes at UCLA. But things quickly grew tense. Paul had just come home from the Korean War and couldn't keep up with Jayne's ambitions. After just 4 months, he gave up and went back to Dallas, alone. Jayne stayed. She wasn't going to stop. In February 1955, she filed for separate maintenance. She was determined to make her name in Hollywood. Jayne's first taste of movies wasn't glamorous at all. In 1955, she appeared in Pete Kelly's Blues as an uncredited cigarette girl, sharing the screen with Jack Webb, Janet Leigh, and Peggy Lee. That same year, she grabbed tiny roles in Hell on Frisco Bay and Illegal. Nobody really noticed her acting, but they couldn't help noticing her looks. Casting directors kept calling. Jayne wasn't going to stand in the background forever. By the end of 1955, she was landing bigger roles, moving quickly from extra to rising star. February 1955 changed everything. Jayne posed for Playboy as Playmate of the Month, showing off her famous curves. The photos shot her into the spotlight and into controversy. The public was fascinated. Playboy's sales soared. Paul tried to use the nude photos against her in court during their divorce, calling her an unfit mother, but judges didn't agree. The scandal only made Jayne more famous. Even though it caused outrage, it gave her something more important: power over her own image. Jayne became a publicity master. In 1955, she staged one of Hollywood's first wardrobe malfunctions at a pool party. Photographers rushed in as her bikini top slipped off. Later, at a dinner at Romanoff's in 1957, she upstaged Sophia Loren with a revealing dress that left nothing to the imagination. These weren't accidents. Jayne knew exactly what she was doing. Every bold stunt kept her face in the papers and her name on everyone's lips. Even when roles were hard to find, Jayne's scandals kept her career alive. Her divorce from Paul was messy and long. It began in February 1955 and dragged on until January 1958. Paul called her cruel and fought for custody, hoping her Playboy photos would help him win. But Jayne wasn't going to give up her daughter. The courts never agreed with him. Even after they split, Paul kept trying to control Jayne and prevent her from taking Jane Marie overseas. Every fight played out in public and kept Jayne in the headlines. In a way, the scandal only helped her grow more famous. Jayne finally got her big break on Broadway in 1955. She was cast as Rita Marlowe in Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter. The play ran for 444 performances and was a huge hit. Jayne was perfect for the part, funny, sexy, and satirical. Her figure, with its famous 40, 21, 35, 1-2 measurements, made every newspaper story about her. Studios finally paid attention. In 1957, she played the role again in the movie version and became a household name. In 1962, Jayne pulled off one of her most shocking stunts. She and her second husband, Mickey Hargitay, went on a boat trip in the Bahamas. Headlines claimed they were shipwrecked and survived on a deserted island. Reporters wrote about Jayne fighting off sharks and finally being rescued. When they returned, cameras were waiting. Jayne posed like she hadn't just survived a disaster. Many wondered if she had staged the whole thing for attention. Whether it was real or fake, the publicity kept her famous. Her career kept moving thanks to a 7-year contract she signed with Warner Brothers in February 1955. They paid her $250 a week at first. Even when the roles were small, the contract proved that Hollywood was starting to take her seriously. Ironically, it ended just as her stage career took off. She walked away and went straight to Broadway, where she showed she could do more than look pretty. Awards followed too. Jayne won a Theatre World Award for Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter, and then a Golden Globe as Best New Star for The Girl Can't Help It in 1956. The praise silenced people who thought she was all looks and no talent. Her timing was sharp, and she could hold her own against big stars. The awards weren't just trophies. They told everyone Jayne was more than a pinup. She was a real performer. Jayne's hunger for publicity never stopped. Between September 1956 and May 1957, newspapers ran her photo nearly 2,500 times. That's almost 10 photos a day. Even more people saw her face in papers than on a movie screen. Jayne understood the power of staying visible. She kept pulling off one stunt after another, knowing it would keep her famous long after most starlets had faded away. And it worked, but still it wasn't easy. From the very beginning, people called her the poor man's Marilyn Monroe. The studios didn't hide it, especially 20th Century Fox. They decided to use her to replace Monroe, hoping she'd do what Marilyn wouldn't. Fox was tired of Monroe's demands. She wanted serious roles. She didn't want to play the dumb blonde forever. So Fox offered Jayne $2,500 a week. That was twice what Marilyn earned when she started. They thought Jayne would jump at the chance and do whatever they told her. But the studios never gave Jayne the same great parts they gave Marilyn. They put her in smaller roles or movies that made fun of Monroe's image. Even on Broadway, Jayne played Rita Marlowe in Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter, a part that was really just a parody of Monroe. Jayne looked up to Marilyn, but Marilyn didn't want anything to do with her. At the 1955 premiere of The Rose Tattoo, Monroe ignored Jayne completely. Later, Marilyn called her a cheap imitation, even saying she wished she could sue Jayne for copying her. Yet Jayne proved she could be a star, too. Her 1956 hit, The Girl Can't Help It, made more than $100 million at the box office. That was huge at the time, the biggest of her career. And it even inspired the Beatles. Both John Lennon and Paul McCartney said they decided to make music after seeing that film. In 1957, she acted with Cary Grant in Kiss Them for Me. And that same year, she gave a serious performance in The Wayward Bus, based on John Steinbeck's novel. She even won a Golden Globe for it. Her average movie pulled in nearly $59 million when adjusted for today's dollars, and 2 of her films made more than $100 million. Audiences kept showing up for her, no matter what the critics thought. Then, in 1963, Jayne shocked Hollywood with Promises. She became the first mainstream American actress to do nude scenes in a sound film. Released just before Hollywood's strict production code was abandoned, the movie was so bold it was banned in Chicago and other cities. A famous bubble bath scene caused a huge media stir. Courts argued over whether it was obscene. Jayne's name was everywhere again. Many people thought she was being desperate, but Jayne knew exactly what she was doing. It kept her in the spotlight at a time when her career was slowing down. It also forced Hollywood to face its own fears about sex and women on screen. Later actresses would do similar scenes with less scandal. Jayne had already broken that ground. And through it all, Hollywood never stopped seeing her as the dumb blonde. Jayne was incredibly smart. She spoke 5 languages. She could play the violin and piano. Even after winning a Golden Globe for a serious role, the studios wouldn't change their view of her. They kept putting her in movies that sold her looks instead of her brain. Even when she studied acting with Carl Malden at the Actors Studio, serious parts never came. Jayne once said she just wanted to be the kind of down-to-earth girlfriend people could relate to. That was as close as she could get to stepping outside the box they put her in. On May 13, 1956, something happened at New York's famous Latin Quarter nightclub that would change Jayne Mansfield's life forever. She was already a rising star, but that night she noticed Mickey Hargitay on stage. He was a strong Hungarian bodybuilder who had just won the Mr. Universe title in 1955. Mickey was part of Mae West's show, and Jayne was captivated. When a waiter asked what she'd like to order, Jayne smiled and said, "I'll have a steak and the man on the left." That playful joke set the tone for a romance that was instant and electric. Mickey wasn't just a muscle man, he was an immigrant who had fled post-war Hungary to make a new life in America. Mae West had hired him after seeing his photo on a Strength and Health magazine cover. To the press, Jayne and Mickey felt like a dream couple. They were a perfect fit for the American fantasy of glamour, reinvention, and passion. Even Jayne's famous rivalry with Marilyn Monroe began to fade under the bright light of this new romance. But their story wasn't all smooth. Mae West was possessive over her male co-stars and did not appreciate Jayne setting her sights on Mickey. Tensions built backstage until they exploded into a violent fight. Chuck Krauser, who also performed with Mae, physically attacked Mickey in a jealous rage. The fight was serious enough that Krauser was arrested and released on $300 bail, around $3,000 today. That scandal grabbed headlines, making Jayne and Mickey's romance even more famous. Their affair was no longer just about glitz. It was full of drama, danger, and desire. By January 13, 1958, they were ready to make it official. The wedding took place at Wayfarers Chapel in Rancho Palos Verdes, California. The glass-walled church overlooked the ocean and looked like a dream. Jayne wore a pink sequined gown with a 30-yard train, and a 10-carat diamond ring sparkled on her finger. Hundreds of fans and reporters crowded around to catch a glimpse of the couple. Mickey had nearly missed his own wedding because the crowds were so big. The newlyweds moved into their famous Beverly Hills home, which they called the Pink Palace. Mickey built a heart-shaped swimming pool and wrote, "I love you, Janie," in gold tiles at the bottom. Every part of the house was over the top, making them one of Hollywood's most talked-about couples. Together, they had 3 children: Mickey Jr., born December 21, 1958, Zoltan, born August 1, 1960, and Mariska, born January 24, 1964. Mariska would grow up to become famous in her own right as Olivia Benson on Law & Order, SVU. Jayne and Mickey appeared together in 4 movies, including Will Success, Spoil Rock Hunter, and The Loves of Hercules. They also took their show on the road with stage acts like the Tropicana Holiday, earning as much as $25,000 per week, a huge sum for the time. Fans loved seeing them together. They invited reporters into their Pink Palace and showed off their offbeat lifestyle. They even slept on mattresses on the floor just to keep the media talking. But under this glossy surface, cracks were starting to show. Fame and constant public attention took their toll. Mickey wanted privacy and a stable home, while Jayne loved the spotlight. Rumors of affairs began to follow them, including one between Jayne and an Italian filmmaker in 1962. Money was also an issue. Both had obligations from past marriages, and often had to put on a show of having less to hide money troubles. By 1962, the marriage was in trouble. Jayne and Mickey officially divorced in 1963, reconciled briefly, then separated for good. Even after they split, Mickey stayed a loyal friend, especially as Jayne's personal life became more chaotic. Tragically, Jayne died in a car crash in 1967 at just 34 years old. Yet even after her death, their story still fascinates people. The world had seen them as the perfect Hollywood family. But behind the beauty and publicity, they were 2 very real people, caught between their fame, their hopes, and the harsh reality of the business they loved. Jayne Mansfield was also clever enough to save her career when Hollywood began losing interest. By the early 1960s, she was headlining Las Vegas shows at the Tropicana Hotel. She earned $25,000 per week, more than $250,000 in today's money. Her salary at the Dunes Hotel went up to $35,000 per week, making her one of the top-paid performers on the Strip. That success kept her going when movie roles disappeared. And even as Hollywood forgot her, audiences overseas never did. Fans in Europe, Latin America, and beyond still went crazy for Jayne. She made films like The Loves of Hercules in Italy and Too Hot to Handle in the UK. Crowds met her at airports in London and Rome. She became an international sex symbol, earning huge applause in Paris cabarets and Berlin nightclubs long after her American career had faded. Publicity was always part of Jayne's game. Long before wardrobe malfunctions were a thing, Jayne mastered the art of making them happen on purpose. One famous stunt was at a dinner in 1957, when she showed up braless in a low-cut dress. Sitting across from Sophia Loren, she leaned over just enough so her dress slipped, and photographers caught everything. Another time, she dove into a pool so that her bikini top would come off. Every move was calculated to draw attention, and every time the cameras loved it. Playboy also played a big part in Jayne's fame. She was Playmate of the Month in February 1955, and she appeared in the magazine several more times. In June 1963, they ran a daring pictorial titled The Nudist Jayne Mansfield, using nude scenes from her movie Promises. It was one of the first Hollywood films with a nude American star, and the issue caused such a stir that Playboy's founder Hugh Hefner was arrested for obscenity. Even though Hefner was released and Playboy thrived, the scandal kept Jayne's name in the headlines long after her biggest movie roles had ended. And when movies weren't enough, Jayne turned to television. She loved appearing on game shows like What's My Line 4 different times, in 1956, 1957, 1964, and 1966. Audiences never tired of seeing her, and panelists always had fun guessing who she was. Jayne showed up on talk shows and specials too, proving she could make people laugh and sing as easily as she could pose for the cameras. That adaptability kept her career alive as the entertainment world changed. By 1962, Jayne Mansfield's career took a devastating turn. 20th Century Fox had once promoted her as Marilyn Monroe's rival, but that year they decided to drop her. Hollywood was changing fast. The flashy, curvy blonde was no longer in style. Audiences now liked a more refined, elegant star. Fox had already been loaning Mansfield out to other studios and cutting back her roles. After Monroe's death in August 1962, Fox decided they had no more use for her. Mansfield had once earned the equivalent of millions each year, starring in big movies and drawing crowds everywhere she went. But when Fox cut her loose, her star status vanished overnight. Hollywood shut its doors, and she was left looking for any work she could find. With the big studios no longer calling, Mansfield slipped into low-budget movies. Throughout the 1960s, she took whatever parts came her way. Some of these movies, like The Fat Spy and Las Vegas Hillbillies, were far beneath what she had once done. They never made much impact, and her appearances grew more embarrassing. She even showed up at supermarket openings and small nightclubs. Sometimes she was paid as little as $10,000 for these gigs. That was still more than most people earned, but for someone who had been one of Hollywood's most famous faces, it was a terrible come-down. Fans stopped seeing her as a star and began treating her like a spectacle. Attempts to jumpstart her career on television and in live shows failed, and she was trapped in a cycle of desperate gigs that never measured up to her past. Her personal life began to spiral as well. By the mid-1960s, Mansfield was drinking heavily. Alcohol had started to affect her work and her relationships. Her third marriage, to director Matt Cimber, broke up in 1966. Cimber blamed her drinking and affairs. Mansfield also took pills and mixed them with alcohol, especially during her volatile romance with lawyer Sam Brody. Public fights, drunken outbursts, and erratic behavior became common. The Los Angeles Times once wrote that she seemed to confuse publicity and notoriety with stardom, and people noticed. When Mansfield died in 1967, an autopsy showed her blood alcohol level was 0.17%, more than twice the legal limit. She also had barbiturates in her system. Alcohol and drugs had chipped away at the focus and discipline that had once helped her rise to fame. Despite earning huge sums at her peak, Mansfield was nearly broke in her last years. At one point, she had earned up to $35,000 a week for Las Vegas shows, and her total fortune was once estimated at $40 million in today's money. But divorces, lawsuits, and reckless spending wiped that all away. Cars, mansions, parties, it was all too much. Without film roles, she relied on small club appearances just to pay bills. By the time she died in 1967, she was deep in debt, and her estate was tangled up in legal fights. It was a sad end for someone who had lived so extravagantly. Mansfield's final years were also shaped by her toxic relationship with Sam Brody. Brody had first been her divorce lawyer, but soon became her partner. They drank and took drugs together. Brody was jealous and often violent. Even Mansfield's children weren't safe. Her daughter, Jayne Marie, accused Brody of abuse shortly before Mansfield's death. Brody's wife called Mansfield the 41st other woman in his string of affairs. Brody would often fight with Mansfield in public. On one occasion, he smashed a hospital phone in a drunken rage. Mansfield tried to leave him, but Brody manipulated her, using her custody battles as leverage. On June 29, 1967, that dangerous pattern ended forever. That was the night Jayne Mansfield left Gus Stevens Supper Club in Biloxi, Mississippi, after 2 dinner shows. She had an appearance scheduled on WDSU-TV in New Orleans the next morning. Her boyfriend, Sam Brody, was with her, along with their 20-year-old driver, Ronnie Harrison. In the back seat were Mansfield's 3 sleeping children: Miklos, aged 8, Zoltan, aged 6, and Mariska, aged 3, and 4 small dogs. Harrison sped down U.S. Route 90 in a 1966 Buick Electra 225, hoping to make the 150-mile trip overnight. At 2:25 a.m. near Slidell, Louisiana, disaster struck. A mosquito-spraying truck created a dense white fog across the highway. The Buick, going between 60 and 80 mph, never slowed. It hit the back of a slow-moving tractor-trailer. The car slid under the trailer, shearing off its roof. Mansfield, Brody, and Harrison were all killed instantly. Watches stopped at the exact time of impact. It was so severe that responders thought the car was a convertible. The accident triggered immediate attention to truck safety. A heartbreaking scene unfolded. The 3 adults were gone. Mansfield's face, forever frozen in fear, was found on the roadside. Yet her children survived in the back seat, shielded by the car's seats. Mariska, who would later star on Law & Order, SVU, had only a scar on her head. Miklos broke his arm and leg. Zoltan was hardly hurt. Tragically, 2 of the 4 dogs also perished. Almost immediately, myths began swirling. Rumors claimed Mansfield was decapitated. Police and photos of a blonde wig tangled in the wreck led people to believe her head had been cut off. But the autopsy showed otherwise. She had suffered massive trauma to her skull, but was not decapitated. Medical reports clarified this for years, but the rumor never went away. The crash would change highway safety forever. The way the Buick slid under the trailer revealed a deadly flaw in truck design. Officials called for safety bars, later nicknamed Mansfield bars, to prevent cars from going under trucks. It took decades for them to become standard. Even today, side underride crashes still occur. But Mansfield's tragic end forced lawmakers to act. Her death is remembered not only for its heartbreak, but also for this vital safety feature that saves lives every day.